Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Althouse and I'm doing my final presentation on Voluntourism. So first of all, what is Voluntourism? It is often referred to as traveling with a purpose or traveling to make a difference. It's often ran by non-profit organizations and NGOs that are well established and managed responsibly. These organizations usually focus on international relief efforts that are brought around by natural disasters, but there's also other opportunities that are widely popular, such as teaching English as a foreign language, environmental research, wildlife conservation projects, community enrichment, as well as projects in construction and agriculture. This new form of tourism has been growing exponentially over the past 20 years or so, specifically in Central and South America, Africa, and Asia. The primary question at hand is often, where does voluntourism fall on the tourism spectrum, and does voluntourism contribute to a community's well-being? In order for voluntourism to contribute to a community's well-being, it must be sustainable for all the social and natural aspects involved while being altruistic at all times. The type of volunteering must be relevant to the community in need, and I'll go over that later when we talk about advantages and disadvantages. But there's also an informal yet valuable exchange of culture between the host community and the volunteers. This allows for fluid processing of involvement and construction between volunteers that's mutually beneficial. The newspaper article that I chose was called "Boom in Voluntourism Sparks Concern Over Whether the Industry is Doing Good." It highlighted the possible underlying disadvantages that go along with voluntourism, despite the obvious advantages that everyone notices. It also mentioned that the intangibility of voluntourism proves that studying and measuring performances is really difficult. The newspaper example that I chose went hand in hand with the assigned reading, Voluntourism, a Review, from our Alternative Forms of Development unit. Both of them discussed potential drawbacks and highlighted factors that were commonly overlooked in the field. The authors also explained that voluntourism follows the same 4 areas of study as mainstream tourism does, which are advocacy, cautionary, adaptancy, and scientific. The authors also highlighted that volunteer tourism progressed from the advocacy stage to the cautionary stage about a decade faster than mainstream tourism did. This gives reason for concern regarding a rise of possible disadvantages coming along with voluntourism. The industry is also working towards the scientific area of study, which will allow for researchers to examine the field in a more systemic and logical way. Developers and management will then be able to expand their knowledge and provide a better picture of voluntourism and the whole scope, and then it'll allow them to understand the depth and to draw better conclusions for constructive criticism and development. There are different types of volunteers that are outlined in that reading, and they include shallow, intermediate, and deep. These are based on 6 different criteria, which were destination, duration of project, focus of experience, which was either self-interest or altruistic, qualifications, active versus passive participation, and level of contribution to the local community. The paper then went on to define the shallow volunteer as driven by self-interest, while a deep volunteer would be more concerned about the livelihood of the community at hand. Regarding advantages brought around by voluntourism, the majority of observed positive impacts have been on host communities that are in remote and rural areas. All planning and matching of volunteers should be based on active consideration of the host community and their needs, and the means for sending such volunteers. Benefits observed have been increased manpower, economic support, and improved facilities and development. Benefits have also been observed for the volunteer tourist, such as self-realization, cultural awareness, and understanding of social awareness, and a better sense of global responsibility. This type of volunteer also, in the reading, it was highlighted that this type of volunteer goes beyond the superficial experiences that is often brought about by mainstream tourism. This results in personal growth and a changed worldview for the tourist. This type of involvement stays with the tourist and volunteer long after their physical participation is finished, which is a primary difference in voluntourism and mainstream tourism. There are also disadvantages that go along with volunteer tourism. These concerns have risen regarding exposing vulnerable communities to unskilled or professional labor and foreign labor. Some say that the volunteer tourism industry lacks the necessary regulations, which leaves sketchy organizations to have control over volunteer placement with no means for real liability. Many of these organizations are driven only by profit and fail to incorporate the most vital part of a long-term strategy for communities that have actual needs. Tourists may go through deculturation upon returning home, and that leaves the volunteer feeling trapped between two different cultures and actually feel homesick for the host community. In order to counter the negative impacts brought about by voluntourism, proper needs assessment should always be carried out along with each volunteer placement to ensure proper pairing between the volunteer and the work that they'll be doing at the host community. There should be more research to learn specific methods of development within volunteer organizations and reporting to go along with each project to measure effectiveness and minimize the negative impacts. An area that needs more attention in post-trip is post-trip changes and transformations for the host community. A lot of the research has been focused on post-trip changes for the tourists, but it needs to be more about the host community, and this type of study would then allow for constructive changes to be made where needed. This is a major opportunity for the industry, and they would be able to build a new model for volunteer tourism that places the communities at the center of the model as the most important aspect, as it should be. And in order for voluntourism to be successful, it should be sustainable for all parties and aspects involved, while not becoming just another form of tourism that's driven solely by commodification.